Have you ever wondered what the most massive, complex, epic in human history actually looks like? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into exactly that, the Mahabharata. I mean, imagine a single story so incredibly vast that it manages to cover literally every possible human emotion, a devastating world war, and some of the deepest philosophical questions about right and wrong that you could ever ask. It's really quite something. To give you a sense of what we're dealing with, there's this absolutely mind-blowing quote straight from the very first section of the text, the Adi Parva. It says, "Whatever is here is found elsewhere, but what is not here is nowhere else." Just kind of let that sink in for a second. That is not just some bold, arrogant claim. It's a real testament to the sheer, unparalleled scale of this work. Basically, if a human being can experience it, I guarantee you it's in this epic. So, here's our game plan for today. We'll start by introducing what the Mahabharata is, unpack the core family conflict at the heart of it, and then dive into the really tricky moral dilemmas of Dharma. After that, we'll do a quick recap to pull it all together and wrap up with a thoughtful closing. Sound good? Let's get right into it. Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, getting to know the history and myth behind this text. So the Mahabharata is officially classified as Itihasa Purana. Now, the word Itihasa literally translates from Iti ha asa, which means so indeed it was. Right off the bat, that tells us we aren't just reading a standard fantasy novel here. In the Indian tradition, this is looked at as authoritative historical writing, intertwined with myth and royal genealogies. It's essentially documenting past events, while at the same time prescribing the right way for us to live. You'll also often hear it called the Fifth Veda. The traditional story goes that the great sage Vyasa composed the whole thing in his mind, but he needed a scribe to get it all down. Enter Lord Ganapati, who agreed to do it but with one massive catch. Vyasa had to dictate the entire thing without a single pause. Now, because the original 4 Vedas were heavily restricted in terms of who could study them, the Mahabharata actually became known as the holy book of the masses. It opened up these grand histories of the lunar and solar dynasties for absolutely everyone to learn from. All right, let's move on to the actual plot engine of the story, that core family conflict. Every good epic needs some serious family drama, right? And here, it's a deeply bitter succession crisis. Let's trace this family tree real quick. The whole story centers on the Kurup dynasty. It starts with King Pratipa, then moves to his son Santanu, and the great warrior, the grandsire, Bhishma. But the real trouble? That begins a bit later with 2 brothers, Dhritarashtra, who was born blind, and his brother Pandu. Because of his blindness, Dhritarashtra wasn't allowed to inherit the throne, so it naturally went to Pandu. And well, that sets the stage for this massive generation-defining rivalry between their children. Dhritarashtra's 100 sons, called the Kauravas, and Pandu's 5 sons, the Pandava. And you know, this rivalry doesn't just simmer, it builds into an all-out war. The crazy part is, the Pandavas, led by Yudhishthira, really just wanted their fair share. They even offered to settle for just 5 villages to completely avoid bloodshed. But the Kauravas, who were totally driven by jealousy, invited them to this infamous, rigged game of dice. The Pandavas lost literally everything and were forced into a 13-year exile in the forest. When they finally came back, the Kauravas point-blank refused to return the kingdom. That usurpation made the devastating 18-day Kurukshetra war absolutely inevitable. Which brings us to perhaps the most fascinating part of the epic, the moral crossroads and the dilemmas of Dharma. You see, this story is definitely not a simple cartoon of good guys versus bad guys. It is a deep, profound exploration of ethics, completely centered around this concept called Dharma. We usually just translate that as moral duty. On the surface, it seems super easy. Just follow Dharma and lead a good life. But actually, it's way more complicated than that. Dharma isn't a rigid rulebook. It's fluid. It varies from person to person and from situation to situation, which constantly, and I mean constantly, traps our heroes in agonizing ethical confusion. To really grasp this, we need to look at what happens when individual Dharma clashes with cosmic Dharma. Individual Dharma is basically your personal promise, your specific duty to your family or your job. Cosmic Dharma, on the other hand, is the supreme, universal justice that benefits the whole world. So, what on earth are you supposed to do when those 2 things completely contradict each other? Think of it this way. Imagine you promised your mom you would always protect someone no matter what. But what if protecting them ends up hurting innocent people? That was exactly Bhishma's dilemma. He made this unbreakable vow to always protect the Kudu throne, regardless of who was sitting on it. Years later, when the evil Kauravas publicly assaulted the Pandava queen Draupadi, Bhishma just sat there in silence. He chose his individual vow over universal justice. It's heartbreaking, really. His personal virtue literally became a universal tragedy. Then we have Karna. Karna was an outcast his entire life, until the Kaurava prince befriended him and gave him royal status. They were incredibly close. But right before the Great War, Karna discovers a shocking truth. He is actually the biological older brother of the Pandavas. Talk about a crossroads. If he acts as a loyal friend, he has to kill his own brothers. If he protects his brothers, he betrays the only friend who ever stood by him. Karna ultimately chooses friendship, aligning himself completely against supreme dharma. And it's not just the morally gray characters who struggle. Even Yudhishthira, who is the absolute embodiment of truth in the story, faces this. During the heat of the war, to defeat a commander who is basically invincible, Yudhishthira is asked to tell a lie. Now, his individual dharma is absolute honesty. He never lies. But he makes the incredibly tough choice to tell this lie for the sake of a bigger dharma, achieving a supreme victory over evil. And he does this guided by Krishna, who really acts as the ultimate problem solver of the entire epic. Okay, let's take a quick breather and do a recap, just to make sure we're grasping the sheer scale of everything we've talked about. So remember, the entire text is broken down into exactly 100 sections, which are known as parvas, and it meticulously documents this massive buildup to the Kurukshetra War. It's a terrifying 18-day conflict that's described in the text as being even more devastating than our modern world wars, literally wiping out entire generations of warriors. If you remember nothing else, here are your core takeaways. First, the epic acts as a timeless handbook for navigating life's complexities. Second, the entire plot revolves around that bitter succession crisis in the Kuru family. Third, the narrative is totally driven by characters clashing between their personal vows and cosmic justice. And finally, Krishna acts as the Sarathi, the divine charioteer, quietly steering the epic toward universal balance. Let's wrap things up now with some inspiring lessons you can actually take away from all this. Because despite all the magnificent battles and politics we just went through, the true underlying message of the Mahabharata is actually that warfare is futile. It heavily emphasizes that hatred only ever breeds more hatred. Greed and violence lead inevitably to ruin. The really profound takeaway here is that the only real meaningful conquest a human being can ever achieve isn't on a battlefield. It's the battle against their own lower nature. I actually want to leave you with a pretty provocative question that the text forces us to confront. Throughout the story, we see characters desperately trying to avoid war, and yet destiny just takes its course anyway. So it makes you wonder, is our destiny completely predefined? Are our actions basically meaningless against fate? Or can human endeavor, the choices we make today, actually change the course of events? Take some time to think about how your own choices interact with the universe around you. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.